I have debated telling this story for a long time. I know how it sounds. I know nobody will believe me. But I have seen the news lately. The strange reports coming out of remote islands in the Pacific. The quarantines being explained away as bird flu or contaminated water supplies. I cannot stay silent anymore. In August of 2022, there was a zombie outbreak on the big island of Hawaii. It lasted for approximately 6 days. And when it was over, the government made sure nobody would ever know it happened. My name is Nathan Kealoha. I am 32 years old, mixed Hawaiian and mainland heritage. I was a paramedic for 8 years, working out of Hilo. I loved my job. I loved the island. I had grown up there, left for the mainland for college, and returned because nowhere else ever felt like home. Everything I'm about to describe is true. I have no evidence. That is the point of a cover-up. But the memories are burned into my brain, and I need someone else to carry this weight with me. It started on a Tuesday night, around 9. I was finishing up a quiet shift with my partner, a woman named Leilani Mahalona. We had handled a couple of minor calls, nothing serious. Then the dispatcher came over the radio with an odd tone in her voice. She was sending us to a residence in a rural area outside Hilo, up toward the old sugarcane roads. The call was listed as a possible animal attack. The caller, a neighbor, reported hearing screaming from the house next door and seeing someone stumbling around the yard covered in blood. Leilani made a joke about wild pigs. Wild boar attacks were not common, but they happened. I laughed, grateful for her humor. When we arrived at the property, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not just blood, but something underneath it. Something rotten, like meat left out in the Hawaiian heat for days. The smell was so strong I could taste it through my mask. The house was a small single-story home, typical for the area. The front door was wide open. There were no lights on inside, but we could see movement in the darkness. I called out, identifying ourselves as paramedics. No response. Just that shuffling movement. We should have waited for police backup. That was protocol. But we heard someone moaning, a sound of pain, and our training kicked in. Someone was hurt. We went in. I entered with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and found the source of the movement. An elderly woman standing in the middle of her living room, her back to us. She was wearing a nightgown soaked in blood. Her arms hung at her sides at an unnatural angle. Her head was tilted, almost touching her shoulder. Leilani called out to her, asked if she was okay, asked if she could hear us. The woman turned around. I need you to understand something. I have seen a lot of things as a paramedic. Car accidents, burns, wounds that would make most people faint. But nothing prepared me for what I saw when that woman turned around. Her face was wrong, her jaw hung loose, clearly dislocated, maybe broken. Her eyes were open but clouded over, like milk had been poured into them. There were bite marks on her neck and shoulders, deep ones, the kind that tore away chunks of flesh. She should have been dead. The injuries I could see should have killed her several times over. But she was standing, she was moving, and when she saw us, she made a sound, this horrible rattling groan that came from deep in her chest, and she started coming toward us. I grabbed Leilani and we backed up toward the door. The woman moved slowly, but with horrible purpose. She was not walking normally. It was more like she was dragging herself forward, her feet barely leaving the ground. We made it outside just as she reached the doorway. In the moonlight, we could see her better. That made it worse. Her skin had a grayish tint. The blood on her was not fresh. It was dark and clotted, and there was more of it than could have possibly come from her own wounds. That was when we found the body. Behind the house, in the tall grass near a small garden shed, we found what was left of an elderly man. I assume it was her husband, based on the wedding ring on one of his hands. That was the only part of him still mostly intact. I cannot describe the body in full detail. Even now, 2 years later, I cannot close my eyes without seeing it. What I will say is this: the man had been partially eaten, not by an animal. The bite marks were human, unmistakably human. Leilani called it in while I stood there trying to process what I was seeing. The woman was still in the doorway of the house, watching us, swaying slightly. She did not come outside. It was like she could not or would not cross the threshold into the yard. Police arrived within 15 minutes. I watched the officers' faces when they saw the scene. The disbelief, the fear. One of them, a young guy fresh out of the academy, threw up in the bushes. They tried to approach the woman to subdue her. I shouted a warning, but they did not listen. She bit one of them on the arm before they managed to get her restrained. It took 4 officers to hold her down, and even then she kept snapping her jaw, kept making that horrible groaning sound. Leilani and I treated the bitten officer on scene. It was a bad wound, but not life-threatening. We bandaged him up, and he refused transport. Said he was fine. Said it was just a crazy old lady. He was dead by morning. By Wednesday morning, everything had changed. I reported for my shift at Hilo Medical Center and found the emergency room in chaos. There were police officers everywhere. There were patients being brought in on gurneys, patients with injuries similar to what I had seen the night before. Bite wounds, defensive injuries on their arms, and that same grey pallor to their skin. I found Leilani in the break room. She looked like she had not slept. She told me that the officer who got bitten died around 5 in the morning. He had gone home, told his wife he felt fine, went to bed. She woke up to him standing over her. She barely escaped. I asked what happened to the officer. Leilani said he was here, in the hospital, restrained in one of the isolation rooms, still moving, still trying to bite anyone who came close. The official word from hospital administration was that we were dealing with an outbreak of an unknown pathogen causing extreme aggression and psychosis. We had been instructed to report all cases to the Centers for Disease Control and to follow enhanced containment protocols. I remember how clinical it all sounded, how calm, as if we were dealing with a bad flu season and not people who were dying and then getting back up. Working that day was a nightmare. The constant stream of patients, the screaming, the restraints that kept breaking because the infected had strength that should not have been possible. I saw a 90-pound woman in her 70s snap through leather straps like they were paper. By noon, the hospital had run out of isolation rooms. By 3 in the afternoon, we had stopped accepting new patients altogether. That evening, everything shifted. Military vehicles appeared in Hilo with no warning. Soldiers in full protective gear setting up checkpoints on the main roads. Helicopters overhead, more than I had ever seen in my life. The official announcement came over the emergency broadcast system. A chemical spill at an industrial facility had contaminated part of the island. Residents in affected areas were being asked to relocate to designated shelter zones for their safety. This was not an evacuation. It was a precautionary measure. I knew it was a lie. Everyone at the hospital knew. But what could we do? I watched the military essentially lock down the eastern side of the big island while pretending everything was normal. Families loading into cars, trusting that the government was telling them the truth. Local news reporters being turned away from checkpoints. Cell phone service becoming spotty, then disappearing entirely in certain areas. I tried to call my mother, who lived in Kona, on the other side of the island. The call would not go through. I tried to text her. Nothing. I started to panic. Leilani found me in the parking lot, trying to get a signal. She told me that one of the doctors had been listening to a ham radio. The outbreak was spreading faster than anyone expected. There were reports of attacks in Pahoa, in Mountain View, in Keao. The military was not containing it. They were trying to, but the infected were in the forests, in the cane fields. You cannot quarantine a disease that walks. I made a decision then. I was not going to wait around to become one of those things. I was not going to trust the government to protect me. I was going to get across the island to my mother, and I was going to get us both off Hawaii entirely. Leilani said she was coming with me. Her family was in Kona too. The drive from Hilo toward Kona normally takes about 2 hours. That night, it took almost 7. The main highway was clogged with traffic. Everyone had the same idea, it seemed. Get as far from the eastern side of the island as possible. Military vehicles pushed through the gridlock, heading the opposite direction, toward the outbreak zone. Leilani and I decided to take the back roads, the old routes that wound through the volcanic landscape. It was risky. The roads were not well maintained and there were no lights. But it was better than sitting in traffic, waiting for whatever was happening behind us to catch up. The darkness of the Hawaiian night was broken only by our headlights. The radio played nothing but the same recorded evacuation message on every station, or nothing at all. Leilani kept checking her phone, hoping for a signal that never came. About an hour into our detour, we came across a roadblock. Not a military one, just cars parked haphazardly across the road. Some of them had their doors open. Some of them had blood on the windshields. We stopped. I got out to look, taking a flashlight and the tire iron from the trunk. Leilani stayed in the car, ready to drive if needed. I approached the abandoned vehicles, calling out to see if anyone needed help. The paramedic in me could not turn off, even then. I checked inside one of the cars and found it empty, keys still in the ignition. In another, there was a purse on the passenger seat, a child's car seat in the back. No child. Then I heard it. That sound, the groaning, coming from the tree line just off the road. I did not wait to see what emerged. I ran back to the car. Leilani already had it in reverse, and we backed up until we found a turnoff we could use to go around. We did not speak for a long time after that. We reached Kona around 4 in the morning Thursday. The town seemed almost normal compared to what we had left behind. Street lights were on. A few stores were open, catering to the evacuees flooding in from the other side of the island. There were military vehicles here too, but they were parked, not moving with the urgency I had seen in Hilo. I drove straight to my mother's house, a small place in a residential neighborhood not far from the water. She was awake, worried sick. She had seen the news, such as it was, and had been trying to reach me for hours. I did not tell her everything. I could not. I just said we needed to leave the island, tonight, as soon as possible. My mother protested. What about the house? What about her job? What about our family history on this land going back generations? That was the hardest conversation of my life, trying to convince my mother that everything she knew was about to be destroyed. I did not have proof. I just had the memory of that elderly woman in the doorway, the feeling of wrongness that had not left my chest since Tuesday night. Leilani backed me up, describing some of what she had seen at the hospital, without going into the worst details. My mother agreed to go. We would take the first flight out in the morning. But there were no flights. By Thursday morning, the Kona airport had been shut down. All civilian air traffic suspended. The military said it was for safety reasons. Contaminated air currents from the chemical spill. By Thursday afternoon, the outbreak had spread to Kona. It started with isolated incidents. A man attacking his neighbors in a grocery store parking lot. A woman found eating her own dog in her backyard. Reports came in faster than anyone could respond to. The military tried to establish a new perimeter, but they were too late. The infection was already inside the safe zone. Leilani, my mother, and I barricaded ourselves in the house. We pushed furniture against the doors. We filled every container we could find with water. We gathered whatever could be used as weapons. Kitchen knives, a baseball bat from the garage, a machete my mother used for yard work. The sounds of that night will never leave me. Gunfire in the distance, sometimes close, screaming, car alarms, and beneath it all, that groaning, that constant horrible sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Through the window, I watched my neighbor's house. The family there, a couple with 2 young kids, had not left. I could see their silhouettes moving behind the curtains. I thought about going over there, warning them, helping them. Then the front door of their house burst open and something came out that used to be the father. I looked away. There are limits to what I will describe. By Friday, the military had changed tactics. I heard announcements from loudspeakers mounted on vehicles, instructing all surviving civilians to make their way to the harbor. Ships were being sent. Evacuation was finally happening. I did not trust it. After everything I had seen, after all the lies, I did not believe they actually intended to save anyone. But we had no choice. Food was running low. The power had gone out overnight, and the infected were everywhere now. I could see them in the streets, wandering aimlessly until they heard something, saw something, smelled something. Then they moved with terrifying purpose. We waited until midday, when the sun was highest and the infected seemed slightly less active. Leilani had noticed that pattern. The heat seemed to slow them down, make them sluggish. It did not stop them, but it bought precious seconds. We made it 3 blocks before we encountered our first group of infected. the way they moved as a pack, the way their heads all turned at once when my mother accidentally kicked a piece of debris. The chase that followed. Leilani saved our lives. She had found a flare gun in one of the abandoned cars on our street. She fired it into the group, and the sudden light and noise confused them long enough for us to escape into an alley. We got separated in the chaos. I grabbed my mother and ran in one direction. When I looked back, Leilani was gone. I never saw her again. My mother and I reached the harbor Friday evening. The scene was chaos. Hundreds of people crowded around the docks, pushing, shoving, screaming. Military personnel tried to maintain order, but they were overwhelmed. There were ships waiting, big ones, Navy vessels. I do not know their proper names. I am not a military person, but they were large enough to hold thousands. Getting aboard was a nightmare. People were separated from their families. Children were crying. The soldiers were checking people, looking for bite marks, anyone showing signs of infection. I watched them pull a man out of line. He was holding his arm against his chest, trying to hide it. When they forced him to show it, there was a bite wound, fresh, still bleeding. They shot him right there. No hesitation, no attempt to quarantine him. The crowd went silent. Then the screaming started. People pushing harder, trying to get on the ships before they could be inspected, before they could be labeled as infected. My mother and I made it through the checkpoint. We were clean. We were lucky. As the ship pulled away from the harbor, I stood on the deck and watched Hawaii disappear. I saw smoke rising from multiple points across the island. I saw flashes of light that might have been gunfire or might have been something worse. I saw figures on the shore, dozens of them, standing at the water's edge, watching the ships leave, not chasing, just watching. The ships did not take us to the mainland. We were brought to a military installation on a small island. I was not allowed to know the name of. Everyone from the evacuation was held there for 2 weeks under strict quarantine. We were questioned extensively. Teams of people in suits asked about everything we had seen, everything we had done. I answered honestly. I had nothing to hide. But I noticed that my answers seemed to frustrate them. They kept asking leading questions, trying to get me to describe the infected as people suffering from psychosis, from drug use, from anything that had a rational explanation. When I insisted on describing what I actually saw, dead people getting up and attacking the living, the questions stopped. They just looked at me with a mix of pity and something else. Calculation, maybe. On the last day of quarantine, a woman came to speak with me alone. She did not give her name. She did not wear a uniform. She just sat down across from me and told me very calmly what was going to happen next. I would be released. I would be given money, enough to start over anywhere I wanted. My mother would receive the same. In exchange, I would sign a document agreeing never to speak about what I witnessed. If I violated that agreement, there would be consequences. I asked about Leilani. The woman said she had no information about anyone by that name. I asked about the death toll. The woman said there was no death toll because there was no outbreak. There was a chemical spill that caused temporary mass psychosis in affected individuals. The situation was contained. End of story. The world was told that in late August 2022, an industrial accident released toxic fumes that affected several communities on the big island of Hawaii. The contamination caused temporary but severe psychological effects in those exposed. Emergency services responded. The area was evacuated. Cleanup efforts were completed within weeks. No long-term health effects were expected. I looked up the news coverage later from the mainland after I had been released. There were a few articles in the first days, mostly local Hawaii news. Then nothing. The story disappeared. Bigger news took over. By September, it was like it never happened. I tried to find other survivors online. Anyone who might be willing to talk. I found a few forum posts, quickly deleted. A couple of videos that were taken down for violating community guidelines. One website that described the incident with careful detail, which went offline one day and never came back. I felt like I was going crazy. Like maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the gas really did cause hallucinations and everything I remembered was just a fever dream. But I still have the scar on my leg from where I cut myself climbing over a fence while running from the infected. I still wake up hearing that groaning sound. And my mother, who does not talk about what happened, who moved to Arizona and never mentions Hawaii at all, still flinches at sudden noises. It was real. It happened. And they made sure nobody would ever believe it. I am telling this story now because of what I have been seeing lately. Over the past few months, there have been reports, small ones, easy to miss. An unexplained illness on a remote Pacific island, quarantined by local authorities. A fishing village in Indonesia where residents reportedly attacked rescue workers. A cruise ship that went dark for 72 hours before being towed to port with half its passengers missing. Each story is explained away. Contaminated water, a viral outbreak, mass hysteria. I know those explanations. I heard them myself, and I know they are lies. Whatever happened in Hawaii did not stay contained. It spread, or it happened again somewhere else, or both. And the same people who covered it up the first time are covering it up again. I do not know what started the outbreak. I do not know if it was a disease or something engineered in a lab or something else entirely. I just know what I saw. The dead walking, the living being eaten, and a government willing to bury thousands of its own citizens to keep it secret. Pay attention to the small stories, the ones that do not make the front page. Look for evacuations explained by chemical spills, quarantines blamed on bird flu, death tolls that do not add up. I do not expect anyone to believe me. I have made peace with that. But if just one person reads this and starts to question, starts to prepare, starts to think about what they would do if the dead started walking in their town, then maybe it was worth telling. If it happens near you, do not wait for help. Do not trust the official story. Just run, and do not let them bite you.